Pinocchio, a little wooden boy who struggles with his lies and must life with it. The pitfalls of the human world to the delight of his loving father Geppetto. Eventually overcomes all the pitfalls and becomes a real boy. But is this story full of fatherly love and dreams come true? Interpreted correctly, old Geppetto lived in his house with only his cat and a fish. What the lonely man wanted most of all was a young son, so he carved at least a puppet of a little boy. The wooden puppet miraculously came to life overnight.
But is it possible for a piece of wood to suddenly start behaving like a living thing? Of course, wood cannot behave like a human being. On the other hand, man can sometimes behave like wood. We know various similes: deaf as wood, dumb as wood, clumsy as wood. Most likely, there has been, and Pinocchio was just wood.
That he'd be on his own to raise a restless child. Not surprisingly, the boy's behavior began to spiral out of control. Pinocchio lied repeatedly and was disobedient. For example, instead of going to school, he went to the theater.
Currently, truancy is treated as a crime of endangering the education of a minor. The boy may have put his father in unnecessary conflict with the law.
The environment of the theater enchanted the boys, so much so that he became a member of the Pinocchio theater troupe. However, the interest in show business raises some questions.
There are even theories that question his sexual orientation. Homosexuality is no longer classified as a psychiatric disorder and is generally accepted. Gays are often very sensitive people with artistic inclinations.
A dirty old carver's workshop where the boy had to live in. Certainly not the ideal environment for a little homosexual. He must have felt that he simply did not belong in this world. This may have been the reason for the boy's persistent frustration, which resulted in his running away from home.
Pinocchio's truancy may have been motivated, among other things, by fear of his classmates, in case he had to face various innuendos and bullying because of his sexual orientation. It is quite understandable that he preferred to avoid school.
However, it was the reason for Pinocchio and unmanageable behavior. Now reality much darker than it might first appear. To understand the whole problem, we have to go back to the very beginning. For example, the story mentions Cricket, who with the bull often talks that such a thing is possible.
Having imaginary friends is quite common among young children. This phenomenon usually disappears before starting school. If, however, imaginary friends appear, continues, it may indicate that something is wrong.
A child's psychological problems often have a link to some dysfunction within the family.
The carver Geppetto wished most of all for a little son. The question is why? Could it be loneliness?
Why didn't he wish for a decent woman he could get along with? Plus, he had a cat and a fish at home, so he had the company taken care of to a certain extent.
That Geppetto's desire for a little boy is highly suspicious, to say the least.
We also have that controversial element of magnifying. Nose jobs, instant nose enlargements, lies every time. It is scientifically implausible. So the question is, was that growing body really
an old man's nose and his desire for a little boy? Psychological problems of the child, an enlarging organ. We have substantial reason to believe that Pinocchio was the boss of sexual abuse.
Excessive affection or reactivity with the erotic dimension to children is a deviation called pedophilia in professional terminology.
Just look at the name alone. Cap. That's when we remove the prefix G, change those to D, and add the ending file. We get the word pedophile. Coincidence? I don't think so.
For sexual abuse of a ward, The offender faces a penalty of between 2 and 10 years in prison.
This explanation also sheds new light on the boy's lying. Was Pinocchio really a chronic liar?
The man kept telling the boy was lying. This was probably to reduce his self-confidence and to reassure him that no one would trust him if he happened to decided to talk about their little secret. This is the kind of psychological abuse that is typical of domestic abusers.
In this case, it is abuse of the person entrusted. The offender faces up to 8 years, unconditional imprisonment for such an offense.
It's possible that Pinocchio, the unmanageable behavior, was caused by sexual abuse. Some of the clues suggest that it is. It turns out that even fairy tales have chilling secrets. Geppetto, could this be one of the most heinous deviants in fairy tale history?